and we welcome you at NIFT Gandhinagar.
Thanks, Professor Ravi.
Yeah.
Good evening to all. It's indeed our proud privilege to welcome our own alumni, very senior alumni, Mr. Narendra Kumar, perhaps who doesn't need an introduction actually. A designer, fashion editor, stylist, filmmaker, and creative head at Amazon Fashion India. Mr. Narendra has been at the forefront of fashion innovation and creativity. As we celebrate 75th years of independence from colonial dominance, we would like to investigate how India's fashion industry has shaped since then. A very relevant designer of our times, Mr. Narendra Kumar Ahmed, who was born in 60s and has seen the Indian fashion scenario while studying fashion in 80s and later working in this area during 90s, we think you would have great insight to share with our faculty and students as someone who has shaped the fashion, especially fashion for the masses. We are honored to have you, sir, and look forward for this enriching and engaging talk on the journey of Indian fashion in the past 75 years. Welcome once again, sir. Over to you, Professor Ravi.
Okay, so thank you, Dr. Khare. Thank you, NIFT Gandhinagar, for having me. Dr. Khare knows that NIFT has been the breeding ground for my mind for over many decades now. And I always tell people that I am where I am thanks to the fact that I had I underwent this course at NIFT then. And my journey has been fantastic, and some of my journey movements, like Dr. Khare said, not just about design, but looking at newness and looking at various aspects of design, from film to photography to art direction to creative direction to curating stories to being the fashion editor, teaching at NIFT. I must say that was probably one of the best times and my best memories in my life has been teaching at NIFT. I remember it was Mumbai, and it was a really, really fun time to be able to spend time with students, and then students were like friends to me. So it was fun, really enjoying, exploring, understanding fashion and doing stuff for a little. Before I start, I would say a little about ourselves and our design philosophy. Our design philosophy has always been about, post 1991, there has been the opening up of the economy, has led to cultural, societal changes in India over the decades. And every decade has had a new story to talk about. And as a designer and artist, my job primarily was to bring together strains of thought that were going through these decades and get them onto the ramp, convert them onto clothing to understand how people live. A lot of our fashion has been what I would say sociological, anthropological in a sense, but with a lot of fun. The element of fun has always been an important part. And every decade has thrown up new ideas. And for us, it was always exciting to look at these new ideas and to see how we could be part of it, or how we could drive, creating concepts like the Fashion Week. I worked on creating India's first Fashion Week concept, then also creating the next gen show at Lakme Fashion Week, which is today one of the best shows for young designers kind of stuff. A lot of areas that gave me room to work on. And so it has been fantastic. And, as far as our collection from our bespoke line, to doing what we do today. 3 years ago, we launched this line called FKNS, which is a athleisure young sportswear line. And you will find that on Instagram at FKNS by Narendra Kumar. If you click follow and check out what we do out there, that brand was a reflection of what was happening in our country, not in our country, across the world. The whole idea of fake news and everything being fake, even a filter, Instagram, pictures, and how could we bring that and convert that into a fashion brand is what we did. And that is what FKNS stands for, fake news. And to tell you a little about our latest collection, it is called 101. And it's called 101 because it's inspired by a book, two books actually, that were written in the 1930s and 1940s. One of them was called George Orwell, 1984. And the second one is called The Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. Both those books spoke about the times that we live in today. And it's a great story on how to see we can reflect what is happening in the world today and how those genius writers spoke about it and wrote about it in the 1930s and how they could foresee what was happening. And here's the important part. For a designer, it is important that you are able to see the future by collecting what's happening around you today. And that is really where the story of that collection is. And that's where we are looking at. So coming back to today's topic has been an exciting journey for India over 75 years. It's a long time for fashion, but 75 years for fashion in a global context is a really deep and enriching times. For India, our fashion story relatively new. Most of what we had, and I will go through these through decades, every decade that we have been up till here, till today. And we will start with like the early, when India got independence. What was it like? What was it like when India got independence? A lot of India was run by bureaucracy. Bureaucracy means, what do you say? We had English people ruling us till that time, so they had a sense of English tailoring. A lot of royalty north of India also indulged in this kind of English tailoring, suits and jackets and trousers and that kind of stuff. But there was also a parallel story that happened of ethnic Indian wear, which was really, if you would see the sherwani worn by the prime minister then, worn by the president, worn by a lot of Indianness to showcase the Indianness. This was what was ethnic and part of the Indian story. And the Indian part drove a lot of its cultural fashion story from the Mughal era and also from the pre-Mughal era, which was no tailoring and only draped clothing. And this is where the land where India is famous for, textiles from different countries, different states, which were all sort of based on drape and not much on tailoring. It is the English and the Mughals who brought in a bit of tailoring into the Indian aspect, into clothing in India. And that's where a lot of India's early tryst with fashion started. I mean, you saw a lot of English people around. They were considered the high end. People tried to emulate. Young Indians traveled abroad, studied abroad, brought back some of their lifestyles with them. And that's really what happened in the 60s, in the 40s and 50s. But the story of Indian fashion really, since the media was not so big, so people could not really see a lot of what was happening around most of fashion out there. The story of India fashion really happened through Bollywood, cinema. Cinema was really the heart of where fashion started. And then also fashion was dictated by the kinds of stories that were told in those cinema. The cinema in the 50s were really stories about, just post-independence, the struggles for independence, the struggle for life, and the struggle for small stories. And so encapsulated a lot of largely ethnic Indian wear and sherwanis and jackets and maybe, saris and kurtas and those kind of stuff were really the big story that you saw in the early 50s. You saw films like 50s and 60s, like Mughal-e-Azam and films like that, that spoke about Mughal culture, and that became a fashion story to drive that era for us. The Anarkali really was seen as the most glamorous story at that point. And that's how we saw fashion in that story. When we move on to the 60s, 60s was the first time we saw westernization of clothing coming into cinema. And I say cinema because cinema has been the vehicle of dispersal or creation of fashion trends over the many years. There was no television, newspapers were very local, there were no national newspapers. And the stories that were told really through cinema that was out of Bollywood. 60s was also when people realized for the first time the women's role in society, and where really fashion started picking up from. Menswear was really not seen as fashion, but 60s were really when the first fashion lifestyle magazine was launched in India, which was Femina. Femina was, as you know it now, was established in 59, I think. That was when it came up, and the first fashion magazine came up, and people and it was sold at 50 Naya Paisa, a copy. And I remember the first cover of that issue, and that spoke of a glamorous lifestyle. The 50s really was driven by small stories, nothing really large, but the big shift happened in, like I said, the 60s. In the 70s really was when global influences started coming to India. Global influences like the hippie movement in America came down to Goa. You could see that reflected in Bollywood, in films in Bollywood. You could see the culture of, type of prints, type of colors, tie-dye, stories that really became big, that were part of the hippie culture. What hippie culture means really a culture that was, one would say, taking you back to earth. A story of about calmness that came about as a revolt against the 1967 Vietnam War. That drove the whole hippie culture. You had the Beatles come to India. You had a lot of all of that come to India. But when you saw that, that was really where menswear fashion took off. Kurtas that were printed, kurtas that were made from Indian textiles, all of those were really large stories that you saw suddenly coming up on the Indian fashion scene. I remember also there was industrial change that was happening around then. The post 50s, the 60s, with the magazine, the 70s was where you saw the introduction of stuff. You also saw the growing of the export industry in India. The 70s, 70s was really when the export market started. And I remember my own trips to what was then called Fashion Street in Bombay, where you could shop for export clothing at like 25 rupees a shirt and 20 rupees a shirt and that kind of stuff, which was great fashion for people, affordable fashion at that point, which was really the real story of street fashion. The hip from all over the country came to Mumbai to shop on Fashion Street because there were no real brands in the country to shop from. Yeah. So the 70s saw a lot of change and a lot of shift of clothing towards a westernization and a kind of integration of India into the global fashion scene. And though it was really slow, these stories were really carried by people who traveled abroad and came back to India. Stories were really fun. It was music. Global stars like the Beatles made Indian fashion famous all across the globe. Yoga became a big thing in the West, and the story really started picking up out there. So India started permeating into the lives of Western society, and their appreciation of Indian fashion really became big. 70s also started seeing the export of Indian cultural events across the globe. Yeah, we saw them in Paris, we saw them in London, we saw them in New York. We saw a lot of stories where Indian culture was for the first time being exported to the West. Yeah, and therefore, while Indian culture was being exported, it was also imported. This two-way traffic of fashion really came into play into India at that point. And some of the Indian silhouettes, like you would see the kurtas worn by the hippies, were converted into kurtas that were made out of striped cotton, seersucker cotton, and fabrics that were daily wear clothing that people could do. Yeah. So there was a lot of influence that was happening on the subliminal level, on the lower level in fashion, while Bollywood and all still looked at the glamour end of fashion. You looked at people like Shammi Kapoor dancing in brocade jackets, and silver screen was the idea of the silver screen was born then, really, where stars became famous doing that kind of stuff. The 70s, though, really being the big part of fashion, 70s also started seeing the emporiums, khadi, local textile coming into the fore. India's first emporium, the statewide emporiums were created across different states. And you could see that people were working to find a role for Indian textiles in a mechanized world. In a mechanized world means what happened was 70s also saw the introduction of polyester in a big way, and ready-to-wear clothing shifted towards something like that. And so Indian textiles started taking a beat and started losing the role they played in daily lives of Indians. And, and 70s Vimal, if anybody remembers, those were some of the big things, Bombay Dyeing, Vimal, those were the big companies that really came up that took this whole polyester story, ready to wear, wash and wear story right across the country at all levels. We were lucky that some of our states still managed to sustain this ethnic story, like especially in the South. You saw a lot of people, Kerala, Tamil Nadu, sticking to their traditional wear. And till today, a lot of them do it. It's only in the last 10, 15 years that it has shifted towards a much more youthful fashion story that you're seeing today. So that, if I was to say what was one big decade that saw changes at multiple levels in Indian fashion, I would say it was the 70s that shifted culturally, fashion-wise, what we saw as the birth of Indian fashion as well as the extinction of Indian textiles, right? So that's really where we saw a great story. That was the first bit of change. And those textiles worked for India because given the level of poverty in the country, not many people could afford the Indian textiles that were there, traditional textiles like silks. And a growing, small but steady growing working class of women in the workforce meant that brands started coming to cater to women's stories. And the brands that came up, and the most significant brands of those times were Vimal and Garden Varelli. And both were polyester-based brands that created clothing made out of 100% polyester. The fact that it dried, worked well, was washable, made a lot of sense to a lot of Indians. So the 70s really saw the big change that came in. And I would think that was the seminal decade for large-scale shift in Indian fashion. Sorry. Moving on to the 80s. 80s, again, picked up on what the 70s said and drove the idea of fashion for women. What we moved on in the 80s, early 80s, was seeing the first branded fashion for women, designer brands that came up for women out of India. And there was a brand, I remember, I was still in school or college at that time, a brand called Mike Kriplani that started the first designer business. And, you know, also at that time in 1980, 82 was the first foreign designer to come to India and showcase in India. And that was Pierre Cardin at the Taj Mahal in Bombay. I remember seeing a cover of his magazine called Island, in which Pierre Cardin was standing there next to these two models wearing these clothes. And I said to myself, oh, men can be designers too. Yeah. And that was really, for me, my real push, and gave me courage to think that men can design clothes and be fashionable rather than just tailoring clothes, you know? So the coinage of fashion for me was the 80s. Mike Kriplani, the first designer brand in Maharashtra, Mumbai, and then Pierre Cardin coming to India really gave me the courage to say, I can take up fashion as a male and create a career out of it. Yeah. And so that's where men's fashion, men really started doing fashion. I remember the first class, my own class, you know, at that point was 30 people in the class, 5 boys and 25 girls, and yet it was seen as the women's domain. But for me, that was really a starting point for fashion. As the designer story picked up, we heard of India's first real doyen of fashion of the 80s, a designer called Rohit Khosla and Hemant Trivedi. There were two people. Hemant Trivedi studied in Australia and came to India, I think. I might be wrong, but Rohit Khosla studied in London and brought that verve of London fashion into the Indian scene in the early 80s. So much so, the idea of Rohit Khosla's design and how people spoke about it, how magazines carried the fashion. He was the first true Indian fashion icon. And unfortunately, he expired in some time later than that. But what he did was, together with him and Tarun Tahiliani, created India's first fashion store. The first fashion store in India opened its doors in 1987 in Colaba. And that is really where the glamour bit of fashion really picked up, and fashion became something to be aspired. They took Indian fabrics and turned them into saris, into gagras and cholis and all of that kind of stuff. And really, the whole concept of fashion started. Modern contemporary fashion started with Rohit Khosla and then Tarun Tahiliani and Ensemble as the first store that opened its store in 87. What also happened in the 80s was a tectonic shift in our understanding of fashion. And what fashion really meant. NIFT opened its doors in '87 for the first time at Samrat Hotel. And that was the day I resigned from my job, because NIFT then wanted at least a first-class graduation or 1 year's experience in the fashion industry. Yeah, and so much so that I was the marketing manager in a company, having worked for 5 years, 6 years already. I quit my job the same day and took up my first job in the fashion industry. And my first job in the fashion industry was working in a manufacturing company where I was matching dupattas to salwar kameez and packing them and sending them off. My first job was packing clothes, matching dupattas and putting in. But the idea of fashion had really stuck in me, and I knew I would do that anyways. And I remember I applied to NIFT for the second year in 88-90 batch. And I went for the interview, and they were all students from Sophia College and other colleges that were looking at, that had already taken a course or degree in fashion, clothing design, not fashion really, because those were the only two colleges that were teaching fashion at that time, Sophia's Polytech and a government school. And it was only meant for women. NIFT was probably the first Indian school that had courses for both men and women. And I remember one of the best experiences I've ever had. I went to the interview, and while the interview happened, I saw all these students. I never thought I would get in, but luckily I made it. And the day I got a green postcard that said I was that I was admitted to NIFT was the day that changed my life completely. So NIFT has played a great role. Coming back to fashion, then the 90s, 90s was also a change in a generation of Bollywood stars. There were younger actors on all sides. The big stars were Aishwarya Rai, Sushmita Sen. The new stars who had emerged out of the 80s were people like Shah Rukh Khan, Jackie Shroff, Salman Khan. I mean, fashion and Bollywood looked much more youthful and more fashionable. But yet, costume design was really the domain that was not open to fashion at all. It was private, it was closed, and you really rarely saw designers making any clothes for film stars or films. Yeah, but the advent of the advent of NIFT and students coming out of NIFT invigorated the fashion scene 2000 onwards. And you will see now in 2000, the great names that have come out of it. You know, people like Rohit Bal, Sunit Verma, Rajesh Pratap, JJ Valaya, Ashish Soni, Gaurav. All of these are batch of 2000 who around the 2000 decade that really changed the image of fashion in India. Another big step that happened in in the 90s was India stepping into a global fashion scenario. In 96, I launched the first global fashion magazine in India called Elle. Elle was 96. I was its first fashion editor. And that's really when fashion began to be seen as a story to be told through images, as a story to be told about shapes and silhouettes, as a story to be told about textiles, and a story to be told about colors. Sorry. Uh, Later that, a year later, 98, 99, you saw the launch of Vogue magazine that really brought the whole identity of modern Indian fashion together. Elle magazine and Vogue. TV coverage was quite heavy through all of that. And designers became the new stars, the glamorous stars of television. And a lot of all of this, while it happened through all of these, we also saw, parallelly the growth of a lot of mass brands in the late 90s, brands like Spiker, brands like Levi's, really fashion going youthful and more broader based. Till then, large part of fashion was driven by textile mills like Raymond's, Reed and Taylor, and Grasim. Those were the kind of brands that really drove fashion. But 2000 was really when glamour and the concept of fashion as we see today through the eyes of like the four pillars, which is silhouette, color, fabric, and prints, are what was born in 2000, where people started looking at fashion through that lens. And 2000 really drove that whole story of the fashion bit. 2000 launched the idea also of multiple fashion weeks. And that's how fashion weeks spread across a lot of fashion across India. There were every city and every town had a fashion week that was coming out. 2008, 2000 also saw the advent of young film stars, Bollywood stars like, Priyanka Chopra, Kangana, not Deepika, Deepika was still a model at that time. 2000 saw these stories about this new brand of fashion, film stars who were driving fashion. What was happening though, and a good way to look at how fashion evolved during 2000 to maybe 2010 or till now would be to see it through the lens of, one would say, Fashion Week. And I remember when Fashion Week started, 80% of the designs that were created had an ethnic story to look at. Most of them were ethnic wear designers, 20% was Western wear. As fashion started opening to the West and Indian press started comparing Indian designers to designers in the West, what happened was a lot of designers shifted their silhouettes from ethnic wear to Western wear. Every designer did Western wear at that point, and 80% of fashion became Western wear. Western wear also was good because Bollywood was turning Western wear completely, driven by a lot of young people, like I said, Priyanka and Mugdha and Kangana. And the film, India's similar film on fashion, was released in 2008. And I had the privilege of styling the whole film, creating all the looks, creating the shows for the entire film, from head to bottom for every actor in the film. Yeah, so that goes down as probably the one film that got fashion into the bloodstream of the country. And so we saw fashion happen out there. 2000 really saw, 2010 again really saw the advent, the late 2000s saw the advent of, actresses like Kareena Kapoor, Priyanka picking up her career, Deepika Padukone, Anushka, all of these driving a sense of millennial youth fashion. Yeah. And so today you're seeing millennial fashion moving to another plate, which is Gen Z fashion, going to be driven by a younger generation of starlets like the Ananya Pandays and actors of all your ages as students today. And so most of this fashion has seen an evolution from, if you see at Fashion Week, from ethnic wear to Western wear, and then back to a sense of fusion in the late 2000, in around 2010, 2015, towards a fusion of youth fashion, which looked at Indian textiles. And I would say over the last 8-10 years, we've seen the rise of Indian textiles mixed with a global silhouette. Yeah. And you know, that story of that global silhouette today is an image of an ikat sari, a denim jacket, sneakers, and multicolored beads with sunglasses. Yeah. And yeah, there is a, I don't know if I can share something, a film that I made for Amazon. And it's a short film about what fashion today really means. Ravi, can I share it from my screen?
Go ahead. Yes, yes.
It's on YouTube. I need to get it from YouTube. Screen. Oh, wait, with YouTube. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
I'm sharing the film.
India, a land of many stories. Stories rooted in tradition, yet unfolding unconventional aspirations. India's story doesn't lie in the past or in the future. It's here, it's now. A story of modernity, but embracing legacy. We go global, yet stay Indian. We turn heads with our turbans on the global ramps. We drape our saris 100 different ways and flaunt those crop tops with dhotis. The story of our fashion is made of these touches of tradition, these curation of cultures. Our fashion is not changing, it's evolving. It's not about following the trend, but trending with our own tales. Tales of textures, textiles, and styles. We are made of rich heritage. We are made of India. We are India modern.
How do I stop that? Okay, so I guess you got to see that, and that is what this entire story has been, and this was the route that India has taken to where it is today, and how young people like you are going to be driving the next part of India fashion. That concludes what I had to say. Is there anything that people would, Ravi?
Yes. We still have around 15 minutes. We can have a small question answer session. If anybody has question here, though I have loads of questions, but if anybody pleases to shoot some questions, I would appreciate if you can throw some questions here.
So I would like to ask a question. I am into NIFT Delhi and I'm doing this diploma course. And when I was deciding this course, I had a confusion because I could not really decide if I am if I want to be a fashion stylist or a fashion designer, because I grew up designing my clothes. I grew up customizing them for myself, my friends, my family. But grew, like when I was in my 12th, this whole concept of fashion styling came, and then it confuses my head even more that now what I'm more attracted. So will you give your vision to this?
Oh, lovely. So fantastic. Great question. You know, that is exactly how I started my career too. You know, uh, altering, not my career, but I used to customize clothes when I was in college on my hand, on my mother's sewing machine. I used to change the bell bottom size of my trouser from 24 inches to 22 inches to 24 inches and learn that kind of stuff. But here's something that is important to know while the difference between a stylist and a designer. As a designer, you have the onus of telling your own story. The story really comes from what you believe in, the convictions you have as a designer, as a person, and how does that reflect in the clothing that you make. There are a lot of designers who do collections after collections based on themes, but to hold something that is really uh, close to you, believe in what you think as a person, and convert that into design really is a designer's job. A stylist's job really is taking multiple influences from everywhere and putting looks together and creating stuff. Stylists are also people who can put looks together, but the concept of creating clothes becomes really difficult. So as a designer, you could be a stylist and you could easily explore that while you're designing. But as a stylist, it becomes really difficult to work as a designer to create new ideas, create new clothes. What you're doing as a designer is creating clothes, creating concept, creating stories. As a stylist, you're creating looks. That is the difference. Looks can also be impactful, like you've seen the Kareena Kapoor's outfit in Jab We Met that became a big hit. But those are one-hit stories. As a designer, you really need to have, number one, I tell people, designers, is first you need to have a sense of conviction of who you are. And that conviction then really converts, because the conviction gives color to your passion, and then you really do is evolve, And I tell students three things that you should be doing: passion, conviction, and evolution is the story of every designer, needs to be the story of every designer. You need to have passion that wakes you up every day and gets you out of bed. Conviction, because it colors and gives direction to the passion that you have. Evolution, because you need to be relevant to the times that you live in. You cannot be thinking of one kind of design and think that you will sustain that over all your life. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, sir, definitely. Thank you.
Welcome. That was a nice question. Thank you.
Sir, I had a question too.
Yes.
I just wanted to hear your views on how social media, especially in the last 2-3 years, has been affecting the world of fashion. Like, do you think it has become more global? Like, it's not just Bollywood that is affecting the Indian youth, but the international celebrities as well, because social media, especially Instagram, has brought people all over the world closer, and like the influence of Kardashians, the clothes they wear, and the fact that now there are a lot of people who have started wearing clothes not because they're going out, but because they want to post the picture or reels on Instagram. Like, what are your views on that?
Nice question. And that is one of the stories that I'm exploring in my new collection, 101. It is about, from the book, Aldous Huxley's book called The Brave New World, where it says that you will kill yourself out of the need for pleasure. the need for likes, the need for all of that will take you into such a cocoon world that you will not think about anything else in the world. So in the face of all of this, you are right, number one, that today fashion is no longer local. It is a global story because of Instagram. But even more so as a designer, you need to have a story of your own to stand out in a crowd. I mean, you'll need to have an idea, an identity of your own that comes through your own conviction for you to stand out in this global crowd. Otherwise, people are just taking pictures and posting and printing and doing stuff like that. And you know, in the next 10 years, and I would request all of you, all students out here, to think about this. The next 20 years are not going to be anything like the last 2000 years. Technology is going to change everything. And what we realized was happening, you know, even 10 years ago might not be relevant 10 years from now as a designer. Yeah. So keep that in mind while you're planning your careers and thinking about what you want to do. Social media, of course, is something that gets you hooked on, and there is a chemical in your brain that the social media works on, and it's called dopamine, that gives you a kick every time you get a like. And then it gets you hooked onto it, and you want more and more and more likes, and then you get lost in all these likes. So you have to stand still among a million universes to be able to create an identity for yourself. And that is why education, understanding, not only technical education, you need emotional education to be a designer. You need to understand how to face what you're going to see in the world, in the competition, and within that, how are you going to find your own space? There's a great technique for doing that. It's called breathing exercises and meditation that will help you find out who you are as a person and allow you to drive your thinking in that direction. I do that every day.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
I hope I answered, you know, but
Yeah.
it is not really an easy situation, really, because so much happening. And therefore, you must think what the world is going to be 10 years and 15 years or 20 years from now when you will be top designers. This world is just not going to be like it was in the past.
Yes, sir.
Because technology is going to change, machine learning, AI, all of that will change everything.
Yeah.
And the only people who will survive are people who can tell real stories.
Yes, sir. So it just came into mind like how we can see the evolution of virtual fashion where people are not actually wearing those clothes, but you know what I mean, AI, and with the amalgamation of artificial intelligence and virtual, what do we call it?
Yeah, I get that. I've seen that, and you know, it's fantastic that it is happening, but you know that, you know, it might not happen so soon. People are already doing, you get excited, people can share it. It's like creating avatars of yourself.
Yes,
you know,
sir.
and for people who are doing any of these stories, you will have 1 million avatars probably, and each avatar will have their own name, and each avatar, and you're already doing that on the games that you play on PUBG and all the games that are there, Fortnite,
Yes.
and all of that.
Yes, sir.
So make yourself a great avatar and have many of them.
Yes, for sure.
Fantastic. Thank you. That was
Thank
nice.
you, sir.
That was nice. That was nice. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
So one more thing, like
One more question from Tanya. I think Tanya, if
Wait.
you're there,
Hello.
Shafiq,
can you?
Tanya.
Tanya,
Sure.
go ahead with your question, please.
My question was with the current situation of the pandemic in India and disruption of supply chains because the rural population is getting affected by COVID now. How do you think the fashion situation in the next few years will change in India, considering the current scenario?
So you must realize a large part of the population of India still does not have access to fashion in terms of what you and me and all of us see fashion. There are almost 300, 400 million people who still don't have access. And as they grow in society, they will start wearing. And also another story that you should understand is about 60% of the Indian population is below the age of 35. That means a lot of fashion is being driven by young people. Out of that, 50% of 55 to 60% are below the age of 25, right? And so fashion is being driven by the youth. A lot of the young people are driving fashion right across. And that's why you're seeing a lot of athleisure and all of that coming. I think post-COVID, we will return to some semblance, but fashion has already changed, And how has COVID changed fashion? COVID has changed fashion in the way people understand what comfort clothing means today. You want to be in joggers, t-shirts, polos. You want to be comfortable first and foremost, right? And that is already what I see on Amazon. We are selling a lot of these joggers, t-shirts, polos. More and more comfortable clothing is what we are selling. And since we are youth-driven market, a young-driven market over the next 20 years at least, a lot of our fashion will be young and youthful. Did I answer your question?
That answered my question. Thank you.
Mr. Shafiq Ahmed had a question, but he's gone somewhere, I think.
Kanishk, I guess. Kanishk had a question.
I'm here.
Yeah, Mr. Ahmed, yeah.
I'm Shafiq here.
Hi, Shafiq, yeah.
It's great listening to you, sir. And I'm a sustainable footwear maker. I'm associated with NIFT in Chennai, so I just came in. Right. We make sustainable footwear for the world, other markets, the developed markets like Japan and other markets where there is demand for. I want to check with you, where are we in the sustainable products, or especially for footwear in India in the coming future? Because we are driven by this, as you said, 35%, 60% of youth market. So where do we see this, and how does Amazon look at this? That is what I would just want to know, the future of sustainable clothing, sustainable footwear. Yeah.
So here's an interesting story. It's really interesting to hear that, and congratulations, and fantastic that you're doing it. It is superb.
Thank you. Thank you,
right way to go. And the thing is, 2 years ago, we created this line of sportswear clothing made entirely out of recycled plastic bottles.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
And let me, I will try and see if I can show you a picture of it. And I also realized it 2-3 years ago that this is really the way to go when it comes to the entire idea of fashion.
Yes.
Can you see that?
Yes, we can see that. Yeah.
So that is sportswear clothing, dry tech, anti-odor, anti-static. And this is something that Jeff Bezos, I presented to Jeff Bezos. He was wearing it for me in his house in Santa Monica. But and it's a great place. But you know what has happened? People in this country, I mean, I think, while sustainability is a big story worldwide, driven by people like Thunberg and young people, sustainability is important for India, given the scale of this country and the kind of rural urban divide. It's important for us to sustain. What has happened in the urban cities is we do not have value for sustainability as yet. They will not pay 25 rupees more for a piece of product, even while you can give them this story. of even though it is sustainable. So I believe sustainability, while it's really important, will take longer to get roots unless it's driven by really young people, Gen Z people who understand, but probably don't have the money to buy it. Yeah. So there's a lot of paradox that is happening. Like you said, in the West, it is much more. And, shoes are a great thing to look at. I love footwear design. I mean, I have a huge collection of footwear myself. But it'd be interesting to see what you have and what you do.
Yes, sir. We do, yes. Yeah.
So we have, some stuff on Amazon on sustainability, but it's not a large driven program as yet. I will be working on it, but the story is not really getting pulled from the consumer side, because value is what most Indian consumers look for. Also, a large part of this Indian consumer being economically backward, and rightfully so, the first thing they would look at is bringing food on their table rather than paying for a fashionable consumer sustainable product.
Absolutely.
Right? So it might take a little longer in India to do this, but there is, at the fashion level, people are talking about it, but it has not seeped down to the consumer as yet.
Yes, sir.
And it will take some while to do that.
Yeah.
And I would really love to see what you do. Thank you very much, Mr. Amal.
Yes, sir. I would like to come back to you. I will come back to you.
We will connect. We will connect to them. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Ravi, anybody else? That's it?
Yes.
So one more, we just learned that a designer should have its own quality to stand out of the crowd. And how should we identify that we had that quality? For example, Paro has a quality that she works on the buttons and she didn't repeat one design of the button and something like that. Right now, I'm in my first year and I'm not able to even decide that I am good in styling or the digital designs also I like. I'm not even able to identify which is my stream. So how could I specify that?
What is it that you spend your hobbies on or most of your time on?
It would be, I say, digital design, but when
so you understand, so you are already off the block. When you think that you have got digital design, one part is learning the technique and knowing digital design will be an important aspect going ahead in the future. You're on the right track. The other part is, what are you going to design really as a designer? What are you going to design as a designer comes from the conviction of who you are as a person, what is important for you today in your life, and how you can translate that into a design language. Identifying an area of expertise I identified when I started, and I'll give you an example of how I did it. I identified myself that pattern making was really the most important thing for a designer in this country, because there are no pattern makers like you would find them in the West. So if you are a designer, you better learn how to make your patterns. If you are doing digital work, you better learn how to do Photoshop and Close and all of those, use all of those softwares. That is the tech part, and that is a fundamental part of what we want to do. How you layer what you love is really the most important thing. For me, I layered it with a sense of intellectualism to it, and my stories were always a intellectual bent to it. It had, Article 66A as one of the stories. It had, we did many different, there were stories about riots in India. Our fashion shows have had dead bodies on the ramp. Our fashion shows are intellectual stories that we tell about, diversity, inclusivity, hatred, and all of this comes from your awareness of what is happening around you. That is where you drive your conviction from. You hear, you see what is happening, and you assimilate all of that into a design thinking process. There is design technique process, which is learning the software, learning pattern making, learning all of those kind of things, putting texture, color together. But your individuality comes from what stories you pick up that surround you and bring to your sketches, your designs, and your stories. And that's where you will build an identity for yourself. I don't mean to say that the story needs to remain the same all through your life. The story can evolve as you evolve, but every time you tell, you have a story to talk about.
Okay, so
Okay,
like,
Ganesh,
can
yeah.
story like change according to our designs? For an example, a story I worked upon 6 months or maybe 6 years, and then I can shift to the another story when I'm like satisfied, like the work
Yes.
I.
Yeah, and you need to be able to evolve. You can't do the same thing for year after year after year after year. Just imagine making the same lehenga for 20 years. Right? So you need to understand that evolution is an important part of design, a very important part of design to be relevant. And mind you, today when people think about design careers, they last from the age of 24 to about 45 to about 50 to 60. In the next 20 years, you will live till about 100, out of which you will have to at least work until you're 80. So your career needs to span a lot and to evolve into many different things that you need to do while you experience what you want to do.
Okay, there are 3 more questions. I'm just going to sum them up and ask you them.
Yeah,
because
sure.
it'll be too elaborate. There are issues from the students. Tanisha says that while she joins, meaning she's just at a junior level as a design professional and working at a grassroots level, how does she make her ideas be convinced? She wants to. It can be very tricky at a junior level for herself to be convincing for her team. That's what she's asking. Another student is asking, Kirti is asking that nowadays getting an internship online has become difficult due to the pandemic. And what is the solution, for internships and getting this hands-on experience, which is a part of the curriculum. Another question is about you. We'll put it after these 2 inquiries from the students about.
Yeah. Sure. So let's go with how do you create something out of, everybody starts in the same place. I also started out of fashion school without anything on my back. But right through school, I knew what I had to be good at. I identified an area that was a big hole in the Indian market, which was a good pattern making designer. And I focused on it every day of my life. And every day I made it, and it was not just a one thing. Even till today, I look at doing one nice thing every day of my life. Yeah. And the day came when Esquire magazine in the US listed us as one of the 50 best men's designers in the world in 2013. So the thing is, this is where conviction comes into play. You need to believe in yourself deeply in what you're doing. And that belief is the conviction that will allow you to stand up against every odd that you have in your life or your career. I'm sitting here and talking to you today, but I have been through many ups and many downs, being broke, being so many different things, having no money, doing nothing, but I still kept going on. And I knew that I had to circumvent and get past something, take things head on, and see where it leads, all the while building knowledge that is collateral to my progress. And that is why I have done everything from being a photographer to a journalist to a teacher to a marketing person, all of that, because all of that helps me do my work even better in a rounded manner. And internships, I did an innovative thing last year for students of a college that I worked with. And I had also suggested it to NIFT, I think last year, where, I worked on an internship, virtual internship, where we went through the entire design process from concept to delivery entirely as a team. Fashion communication students, graphic designers, fashion communication, textile design, and fashion design, and marketing put together. Each made into a single group of 4 different faculties so that each one could work on a concept from beginning to end. Yeah, there was also garment manufacturing students in that batch, where they did the line drawings, the tech sheets for all of those collections. So internship, I know, is really difficult during COVID times, but there are solutions. You make the best of what you can, and students got to see. And what happened was, it became interdisciplinary, and that is what the future is about. How do you know what your teamwork is doing, and not living within a silo for yourself? And this kind of each team presented a project at the end of the internship. So that is how we did the internship. But I know it's difficult to do live internships with people. But a lot of all of this is sort of at least understanding, preparing the ground. A lot of this is research that you would do, that you can do online anyway, and put stuff together. Some of it is what you have learned, and you can put that together. But the idea that you will step out into the real world, knowing fully well what are the components of your work. And it is not just limited to design. You need to understand marketing, graphic, all of that, and see how that works to be able to convert your thought into reality.
Okay, Mimansa, we'll take the last question here right now. Mimansa has a question. Mimansa, if you are there, if you can ask this, or you want me to do that?
Yes, sir, I'm there. So, good evening, sir. This is Mimansa from NIFT Gandhinagar. And I really wanted to know that you've mentioned before, like how you got to know about the male fashion designers because of when Pere Cardin visited India. So
Right.
I want to know, like, at what age you made up your mind to be in this industry, and what inspired you to be in fashion?
Okay, so you might fall and you might laugh at this, but that's a nice question. I went through school. I failed in my 12th standard. I got through my BSc in chemistry and economics with 43% marks after copying. I told you laugh. And my first job ever after graduating from Bombay University was selling photocopies at Nariman Point for 15 paisa a copy. I used to sell photocopies door to door in offices in Nariman Point. That was my first job. My second job was, after that, was selling glass bottles like this, milk bottles. I used to sell this to government dairies across across the country, Coca-Cola bottles and all of that. And I rose to become a marketing manager in that company. I worked for 6 years, 7 years out there. And then, but I always loved fashion. I used to, like I said, alter my own clothes, but there were no school for boys in India to learn fashion in. So I just pretty much did nothing with my life until I was 27. Then I applied, then I got to know about NIFT and I quit my job. And I applied to NIFT after 1 year, after doing that job of matching dupattas and learning a little bit how to sketch. But I told myself that if I started when I started then, even if I was 28 when I started, and I must tell you, the faculty that interviewed me, one of the faculty from the US that was there from FIT, they were FIT faculty members from the US, they said to me, are you not a little too old to do this course? Because they were 12th standard kids and I was like postgraduate and all of that, everything, and worked for 7 years. But I told them, whether you give me admission or not, I have quit my job. I am going to be a designer, whatever happens. But luckily for me, I got that admission. And then this admission and being in fashion gave me my voice. Today, I use fashion to make political statements, sociological statements, cultural statements. Yeah. And that is what fashion really is about. That, it is not just about making clothes, it's about telling a story of the times that you live in. And that's what drove me to fashion, that I could tell stories. And so today, 2 years ago, we had a film that opened a film festival in Brisbane, a 20-minute fashion film festival that spoke about the times that we live in. And that is what is really important. How do you mix culture with design, put it on the ramp or put it on celluloid? That's what fashion is. And it's important that, that is the conviction you need to drive your thought process and your career.
Thank you so much, sir. And sir, before ending my question, I want to ask also according to you, how much an experience or time does a person need to open his or her own label and present him or herself as a brand? What kind of experience and how much experience?
So today, it's so much more easier. Earlier, when somebody had to open a brand, you had to open a shop, you had to pay lakhs in rent, and had a big factory and do all of that kind of stuff. Yeah. Today with digital stuff and e-commerce, you make 20 outfits and you can start selling on any e-commerce platform. But the thing is, how do you get the confidence that you're ready to do that? You will never get the even today, I'm not really confident. Every time I do a collection, I'm worried what will happen. It will never come. But if you don't try, you will never know. You can try and you can fail and you can learn, which is what I have done. But I would regret it if I didn't try at all. And it's okay to grow up learning that you might be wrong at this place, and you need to have an open mind about it. Nothing is final, nothing is the end. You have a long, long, long career ahead, so much to do. And I would also think that, it'll be good to take up experience in manufacturing, in an industry, to see how industry works, how you work with people. And then if you have 50,000 rupees, if you have saved that much, you can start a collection of your own. What do you need to do today? You can print t-shirts that cost 300 rupees and have a design collection of your own, as long as you tell a story. So there are many different ways of trying, and not all need to be so expensive. And I will tell you a story of my collection at NIFT for finale. Everybody, I was a scholarship student at that point. So I really didn't have money. So my final connection at NIFT had, you know, multiple layers and layers of clothing, but it had there were 5 outfits, multiple layers of clothing, all of this. And I put it together in 1,200 rupees, all of these clothes, made it out of the cheapest cloth that was possible. All of that, I had no money for shoes for my collection. But that is what is important. Money is never the story. The idea is how much you want to do it, what it means to you, and how hard are you willing to achieve it.
I think that's a great, inspiring
Thank you so
story.
much, sir.
Very inspiring story, yes.
No, it's fantastic. You work with what you have, but you don't give up.
Yes. Yes, I would request Sumita, if you are there, we'll conclude this session here. And really great to hear the story, and really great to...
I'm sorry I got too excited and I went...
No. This is what we're looking for. This is exactly what we're looking for.
You know, when NIFT opened in Bombay, and most of the time, I'm sure Mr. Khare knows also, I used to be called to do the commencement speech to parents and students, you know. And the first thing I told students then was, not all of you will be successful in life. And suddenly everybody said, like, how can you tell that to students when they're sitting there? But I did qualify by saying that...
Orientation program. You're referring orientation programs.
Orientation 1.
Yes.
And I said, I did qualify by saying that each and every one of you has an equal chance at success. And it really depends on what you make out of the course that you have on your hand, and how you believe in yourself and the story that you want to tell.
True.
Thank you so much, Mr. Narendra Kumar. Thank you so much. Before we conclude this session, I want to take this opportunity on behalf of NIFT Gandhinagar to thank you and extend a vote of thanks, our gratitude to you for taking out your valuable time and giving us so many insights into the world of fashion in the last 75 years, and then sharing your personal stories, your personal inspiring stories, and patiently answering all those questions by our students. And finally, work with what you have and never give up. I think this can be our mantra for all of our students. Thank you so much. I also want to thank Professor Ravi Joshi, the host for today's show. Thank you, Ravi, for steering us through this. And thank you all our audience for joining us and patiently listening to this talk and being with us. Thank you, everyone.
And, you know, I just wanted to say in conclusion, one of the best experiences in my life has been teaching. I used to teach at NIFT from 9 o'clock in the morning till 9 o'clock at night, while I was working as a fashion editor in a different, on a magazine. Yeah, I was lucky to do it. I enjoyed the company of talking to students, opening their minds really more than anything else. Not pushing them in any direction, but opening minds is really what I love to do. And talking to students is always a pleasure. This is something that I will get back to once I finish with my design life.
Thank you so much. Thanks, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Khare. Really,
Thanks.
Thank you so much for all of this.
Thank you, sir. Bye.
Thank you, Ravi.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Bye.
I have sent you a mail, Nari.
I'll check it. I'll check it and I'll get back to you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Sure. Bye. Bye.